Hi class, in this video lecture, we will discuss the planning of an audit of financial statements. We are still part of the risk assessment phase of an audit, and this time we will going to cover planning an audit of financial statements. Let's move on to the contents of this video lecture. So in this video lecture, we will cover introduction to the audit planning process. So followed by understanding the client business and its environment. So considering the laws and regulations in an audit, establishing audit materiality, assessing the risk of material misstatement, performing preliminary analytical procedures, and finally, closing out our discussion with establishing our overall audit strategy and the more detailed audit plan. After completing the acceptance and continuance process that we have discussed in the video lecture, after obtaining an agreement with the management of our client, we are now ready to start our planning process. So although the output that we had in that particular part of the audit, the preliminary engagement activities, would also be part of our consideration during this planning process. According to PSA 300, which is our main standard or PSA for this lecture, an auditor shall plan the audit so that it will be performed in an effective manner. So in an effective manner, meaning the auditor will be able to achieve the objectives in an audit of financial statements. Audit planning involves number one, establishing the overall audit strategy, which will set the direction of the audit, and number two, developing a more detailed audit plan. So the more detailed audit plan follows the direction set in the overall audit strategy and enable the auditor to determine the nature, time, and extent of his or her audit procedures. So take note also that planning is an iterative process. So meaning to say we have to consider continually the possible changes in our audit plan in the light of new information or circumstances that we may encounter during our audit. So there will still be changes that we would do on the plan after our initial planning phase. The two main outputs in the planning phase of the audit are number one, the overall audit strategy, and number two, the more detailed audit plan. We document our audit strategy in what we call the audit planning memorandum, although in practice it may be called differently depending on the auditing firm. So sometimes it may be called audit planning strategy or audit strategy memorandum or simply audit strategy. So also, most firms use an audit planning template as a guide to complete this audit strategy documentation. So, but the main point of this documentation is to summarize the decisions that the team has come up during the planning phase of the audit. And therefore, it communicates to the members of the audit team the main emphasis of these decisions as a reference to the member of audit team during the audit engagement. So therefore, less senior member of the audit team or newer member of the audit team may refer to this document as a direction in performing the audit engagement. And then, on the other hand, we have the audit program, which documents the audit plan or the detailed audit plan containing the list of procedures that will be performed but in obtaining the evidence during the engagement. As mentioned earlier, PSA requires us to plan the audit so that we can achieve the objective of the audit of financial statements. However, aside from ensuring that the objective is achieved, planning the audit will also have benefits on the part of the auditor so that the engagement will be done in an efficient manner. So here are some of the benefits of audit planning, including number one, we can devote our attention to important areas. So therefore, saving us important resources in conducting the engagement. Planning also help us anticipate potential problems that we are likely to encounter during the engagement and therefore result in an audit that is both effective and efficient. So planning also help the audit team to select and assign particular tasks to the members of the audit team. So we can, for example, decide who is the most appropriate person to do a specific task or assignment. So based on their competencies or capabilities and the characteristic of the engagement. And therefore, planning can also facilitate the direction, the supervision, and the review of the work of the team. And finally, planning can also properly coordinate the work of different parties involved in an audit engagement, such as component auditors and experts. So let's proceed to the major planning activities performed by the auditor in planning an audit of financial statements. So remember, this is a part of the first phase of the risk-based audit process, which is the risk assessment. So during this time, we understand the business of our client to assess the risks of material misstatements. So we consider first the result of our preliminary engagement activities. So remember the client acceptance and continuance. So our findings or the result of our activities on that part of the audit will be considered also during the planning phase. So then, very important, we have to understand the entity and its environment, including its internal control. Then, we set materiality levels that we will be using in our specific procedures and use that information to identify and assess the risks of material misstatements and take note of other consideration. So these major activities will result in the output in audit planning, as we mentioned, which is the overall audit strategy, which identifies our engagement characteristics, reporting objectives, the significant factors, and the experience, the results of our preliminary engagement activities, as mentioned earlier, and the nature, time, and extent of the necessary resources to conduct the audit engagement. So aside from the overall audit strategy, we also have the more detailed audit plan, so which lists the nature, time, and extent of our specific procedures under risk assessment and further audit procedures, as well as other planned audit procedures. And take note also, we mentioned in our introduction that audit is an iterative process. So meaning this audit strategy and plan would be continually updated in the light of new information that we might encounter as we progress during the audit. And we also have to communicate our plans with management and those charged with governance for proper coordination. So usually, what we communicate would be the general schedule or the schedule of the general activities that we will be performing. So not to the extent of a very detailed procedure that we expect to perform. So because if we do that, then the element of surprise might be removed or missing. So giving opportunity to the management, for example, to address the possible procedures that we will perform. Okay, so that is why as auditor, we use our professional judgment to communicate certain aspect of our planning process with the management so to properly coordinate the audit work. Okay, so example, major activities such as observation of inventory count. So that is something that you need to coordinate with the client. So because a lot of resources and manpower would be needed, so to conduct that activity on the part of the client. So proper coordination must be made so before we pursue that particular or the type of procedure in our audit plan. So now, last video lecture or in our previous video lecture, we already discussed preliminary engagement activities. So which involve the client acceptance and continuance procedures as well as establishing the basis of the engagement. So on this part, we will discuss the next activity, so which is understanding the entity and its environment, including internal controls.